and going to look at some of the reports from today. Some of this is more of an update or a change in the narrative or even the angle of the story. A proposed socialized with administrators this week, Big Ten and SEC would combine to earn about 58% of the college football's base distribution, a figure that will grow in participation, distribution, depending on how many teams get in. Also, the figure would then greatly exceed what the ACC and Big 12's combined distribution number will be, roughly expected about 31% of it, and the remaining amount about 10% with Notre Dame and the 64 group of 5 teams, which is what Chris Pesman was just talking about. Craig asked the question, $2 million before and now getting $10 million or more at least for the next year. Now, this now takes a backseat to even the format, which we'll get to in a moment. So would you do that? 58% for 2, Big 12 and ACC get 31%, the 11% or so left goes to Notre Dame and everyone else.
I mean, if I had to, I would. I'd try to get a little bit of a better number. And look, if your money's going up, I mean, I guess that can be the benefit for that. But I would still push back a little bit more into, making sure that the two don't run away and hide as much as they want to run away and hide. Now, look, they have a ton of teams in those leagues, but if you combine just by amounts, like right now, it's 34 to 33. So, they've got one more total team in that bunch of the rest of them. So I don't know. I think it's fine. It would be okay. And I'm not a numbers guy, but still, you just don't want to get the gap is that's what's going to keep getting people, especially in the ACC, saying, well, how are we supposed to do this if they already have a big TV gap, and in this thing that we're all in together, their gap in that is even bigger.
Their gap would be the SEC, Big Ten, about $300 million more than the ACC and Big 12 every year.
Yeah, so you're not helping shrink those things at all with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not their jobs to make sure that the Big 12 or the ACC survives. In fact, I want to congratulate whoever sat in a dark room a decade ago, whenever it was, and schemed up this whole idea of how we've gotten here in the little, because this is just so, it just feels like some of it's winged a little bit. Some of this was just winging it and it fell the way that it fell. I don't know if the design was to necessarily have Cal in the ACC. But I think a lot of the other moves that have been made, it just feels like part of a grander design. Does it not? It's all been leading us here this entire time. And I can't help but get that feeling every time another domino drops. And so it's, in some people's eyes, been inevitable that there was going to be a split of some sort, or it was just obvious based on reading the tea leaves. I think there's a lot still to talk through with this. Obviously, it's being socialized, as I think is a very important word there. It's not being finalized, but socialized. But there does come a point where there's such a gap that, yes, thank you for allowing us to participate, but is it worth it in the long run? Or would it be better for you guys to go ahead and break off and go make whatever money that's going to be, and we'll stay back and we'll play more of what people consider college football? Well, we'll still have to pay our players, but you'll just pay your players more and you'll get the better players, and that'll pump up your numbers and juice those up, and your historical record books will look great when it comes to various other categories, because now you can just, buy players basically. But I think for the Big 12, and the ACC, it's just, the ACC is in such a tough spot because this is only going to force more of a move than was already being forced to begin with. So it feels like they're in a different category by themselves. Whereas with the Big 12, they could always get some teams picked apart. But at what point, to Paul's point, does the gap become so large that it's not even worth putting up the fight anymore? Where it's just thanks for passing us some crumbs, but that's not even worth it, because
would you rather than break off something inside of you?
Yeah, I guess that's a way to put it. Yeah. Sure. I just think that at some point you're not even playing the same game. So what's the point of continuing to try to pretend like you're playing the same game? Yeah. So we already have the deck stacked against us because of history and because of TV contracts and because now two groups have basically accumulated all the biggest brands. That's fine. We can acknowledge that. We're appreciative at a seat at the table. But at some point when these leagues are making $300 million more to play the exact same game and play for the exact same title in the exact same format that we're playing for, we're not playing the same game, really. I mean, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. And so at what point does it no longer become worth it? At what point do you just say, all right, this is so ridiculous that y'all go play for what y'all are going to play for. We'll go talk to whoever about where our games can be played and what we're going to go play for, because this is not the same thing. And I don't know if that hurts college football's, fandom overall in the long run or not. But I mean, it's kind of like the way things are going. It's just you're not playing the same game. Especially the money thing matters so much because we're not talking about competing over facilities anymore. We're talking about actually going out to buy players and do things of that nature. So it's just so lopsided that you're really not playing the same game if the money becomes that unbalanced, and it already is. But I mean, today, another $300 million difference. Like, what are we even talking about here? That's not there's no way to overcome that.
That's why leagues have salary caps, even though some can abuse them and then get stuck, or some can pay that threshold fee, whatever. College football is not doing what most professional leagues do. Now, some owners spend more than others, but you're right, it'd be $300 million. And then another one. And not on top of that, the TV money in the first place before you even get the money for the college football playoff. And you're going to get units, so to speak, depending on how many teams you get in the playoff, on top of what you're going to get just because of the percentage.
So you're already sitting there if you're any numbers. If you're like Houston compared to Ohio State, like that's never going to shrink, and I don't think you expect that you're ever going to be on par with them just because you can't compete with their history and their amount of alumni and all that. But now when it's set up to where the networks and the playoff and all these other entities are designing it to where they make another $200 million more than you or whatever the number is, it's just like, what are we even doing here? I mean, how are we even going to pretend like this is competitive when we already have a hard time kind of pretending that, but there's at least a close enough gap that you can see scenarios where it's still competitive, right? This is to the point where it's like it's so
like
lopsided. Yeah, it's so lopsided. Yeah. It's like, what are we? Let's stop pretending. Let's just y'all go do y'all's thing. Y'all go make all that money. Everybody else can make the money they're making. The programs aren't going to die off as far as football goes. I don't think schools are going to shutter because guess what? The networks, as much as they have their hand in this, they still want football inventory. So it's not like the Big 12 or the ACC or whatever's left over is just everybody's going to shutter their programs. They're going to have to play somewhere. So, yeah, I think you have to start thinking about the gap being so large that, okay, what does this other thing possibly look like? And you have to at least be investigating that right now. Or there could be people who just are happy for a seat at the table and want to pretend like they have a chance. When right now I think you still kind of do, but you're getting further and further away from that. And if this were to be the case, then, I mean, there's no chance in hell.
The only way to close the gap in that case is to rob Peter to pay Paul. So, like, what you do is, all right, so say you are Clemson and you are mad about the gap, which is, now $100 million a year between you and Alabama, right? And the money that they have. So the only way you can
That's
close...
a little bit more. It's a little bit much.
But, well, I mean, like, if they're going to make $50 million more in TV revenue and $80 million, so it's $80 million you got to make up. Well, the only way you compete with those resources is to take them from somewhere that you already have. And so, because you can't just go out and create a new thing, so that's where then it starts to hurt everything else because you're like, well, we have to make football work because that's what everybody cares about. And you're like, hey, the swimming pool's out of water. And you're like, well, guess what? Yeah. It's going to stay out of water.
But if they do break off and there is a different deal, there's going to still be TV networks that want to carry the other division, whatever it might be called. And yet again, the separation is there. Eventually, it's a chokehold. Eventually, you just don't get a chance to compete for what is the ultimate of the national title, like a North Dakota State or a South Dakota State have theirs, or Mary Hardin Baylor or Mount Union have theirs. They still celebrate it, but eventually, financially, you just don't have enough. And I think at some point, even though no one's going to just disappear, there will be some programs, instead of opting up, are going to opt even further down because they just can't keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah, there'll be collateral damage for sure. And I understand that the money that you could make as a different league, so to speak, would not be the money you necessarily make in this. And that might be why some capitulate and they just say, you know what? They're making $100 million more than us competing for the same prize. We see that, but I guess we'd rather just make the Sugar Bowl, or not even do that. Maybe we just fight for the chance to host a first-round game one day, and that's our goal as opposed to it being like the national championship. And look, for some programs, that's already unrealistic in this format to win a national title anyways. I think we understand, but for the most part, they've been able to keep the spirit of college football alive to where everybody, if they feel like they've got that certain setup 1 year, they have a chance. When you create a gap to where it's like $100 million and the whole system revolves around paying players, it's just not feasible to think that that's possible any longer. Even if it was a far off, barely twinkling star to begin with, now it's just pitch black. I mean, there's just, you'd have to be acknowledge reality. But maybe just that little carrot dangling is good enough for some people to say, you know what, we'll just take our medicine and we'll make $100 million less just to be a part of the party. And maybe that's what eventually schools decide to do because it's better than the alternative. But yeah, at some point you just have to go, we're not even playing the same game here. And
It's
what does it look like
being
when
in an abusive relationship?
But like, at what point, if employment becomes enacted, like we're steadily heading down the path of, and there's conferences making tens of millions of more, well, they're not going to have a hard time paying their players. You, on the other hand, are going to have a bit more of a difficult situation. So what alternative could there possibly be? I think that's something you have to explore, but I think more than anything, you keep fighting for yourself and you see if, kind of like the automatic bias thing, if you dig in your heels and you talk it out, then maybe you can get something a bit more feasible that works for you a bit better than what's being proposed today.
I think what's good is because of the reaction, it's been reported today that because of the negative tone and reaction to the automatic qualifiers or the first round buys, that now seems to not be extinct, but that thing right now is taking a back seat for trying to figure out the revenue, and that remains to be seen. When we come back, great